Can you guys, whoever is on stream, let me know if you can hear me? Just type into the chat window if you're able to. All right, so let's get started. Today's topic is about critical thinking. Um, and there's some techniques called mental models or frameworks, which we'll actually get to in our later semesters, which are frameworks that exist that help you become a critical thinker, right? So, anyways, first, let's pause for a bit and have a discussion on what critical thinking actually means to you. So, what I would love for is, you to reflect on a time where you think that you had to make a decision in your past, right? As students in schools or colleges, just type in what you think was the last time you had to make an important decision which needed some amount of critical thinking. Yeah. So I'll wait here. Just type into the chat window any decision at any point in your life so far which involved making an important decision. Yeah, I'll wait for the people who are online. Just chat, put it into the chat window, right? I'm sure all of you, whatever, in your 19, 20 years of life so far, have some time or the other had to make a decision where you would have had to think through a little bit, right? Um, I'm hoping it's not that we've gone through 20 years of life and never had to make an important decision. What do you guys think? Somebody? Okay, Lubab, thank you. The most difficult decision yet is about the course we have taken, choosing the degree. Absolutely, right? Perfect, right? So I'm sure when you had to decide, right, which college to join or which degree to choose, right, um, it was a decision which wasn't going to be easy, right? And each of you probably used different metrics, different ways of deciding which college, which degree, where to go and join, right? Hopefully, most of you didn't go about, because my friend is going there, I'm going to go and join that particular college, right? So that's a pretty important event of your life, which involved making a decision which would take time thinking, right? And I'm sure, as I said, each one of you went about it differently, right? So similarly, now going forward, as you grow up, right, there will be many, many more situations where you will have to make decisions in the future, right? Absolutely, Vignesh. Very true, right? So, what we are going to try and talk here today is, whenever we are encountering a situation like this, whether at the workplace, whether in your personal lives, what can we because it's not going to be that overnight suddenly because you have to make a important decision you can become a good decision maker, right? It's a skill that needs to be developed, and it's a skill that you have to work on to become good at making good decisions, right? And so that's what we will be talking about today, and trying to give you certain techniques that can help you make better decisions. Yeah. Okay. So, obviously, there is kind of a textbook definition of what critical thinking is, and we don't really need to get into that. We don't really believe much in theory. I think the more important thing for us as a takeaway is that as human beings in our lives on a day-to-day basis, we have a tendency of making quick decisions, quick judgments, right? And that actually prohibits or stops us from making probably the best decision that might be needed. And so one of the things that if you can take away from this session is that you need to get into the habit. And as it's shown over here, the last line is very, very important, right? Which is never, never, never be in a rush to make a judgment, to make a decision, right? Because there are no prizes really for making the quickest decision possible, right? The right thing is to make the best decision possible. And today we will talk about, why that is important. How can you develop those skills? What stops us actually from becoming a good critical thinker, right? And so ideally, as long as kind of time permits, we should kind of hold back, understand the problem, spend time researching, collecting as much data, analyzing the data and information that we have, and then reach to the decision point, because those steps will enable you to make a better decision in life going forward, right? So remember that. And kind of moving on, right? Just some more kind of definitions of what and why, right? And sometimes this actually will become a part of your normal life also, right? So, for instance, if you are a nurse in an emergency room, right? Your ability to try and figure out as to which or what is more of an emergency versus not, right? It can't be on a first come first serve basis, right? If you become the like an engineering lead, and your software is in production, right, and you have problems, right, in production, and customers are complaining and things are crashing, right? Your ability, right? So it's not that always you will have a lot of time to kind of step back to research, analyze it. Many a times, if you start some of these techniques and understanding these, it can even help you in your day-to-day lives, right? To be able to make decisions that may require time limitation, but yet kind of arrive at the best decision that might be possible, right? So kind of hopefully you get a sense of why this skill is very, very important. As we always say in Satcam, this is one of those four key skills that companies are looking for in employees, in successful employees. And unfortunately, there isn't like a class that you can take to become better at this, right? The good news, as all other skills, is the fact that these are not skills necessarily that you are born with. They are skills that you can learn. They are skills that improve as you practice more, right? And hence, if you can get into this habit right from now, it will help you, right? And then now, why is it important, right? So we've listed, and again, this is a mouthful in terms of a slide. We're not going to go through everything. These slides are going to be available to you, so you can always kind of look back at it and study the material if needed, right? But essentially, critical thinking helps you in making the best decision possible at that point in time, right? So enables you to make better decisions. If you are in some kind of a debate or a discussion, or what is the better design, right? The ability to make your viewpoints, right, with stronger arguments is something that will help you if you are a better critical thinker. It obviously is a great tool that enables you to solve problems, right? um, and then obviously, even on a day-to-day life, right, it's not only about successful in your career, right? Which house at a later point in life, when you want to buy a house or an apartment, right, which is the better one to buy. That is a pretty important decision that you and your family will have to make. And your ability of thinking through and arriving at the best possible decision will hold you in good stead, will be very important. And hence, even kind of navigating the world becomes pretty important for us, right? So now, before we go into, okay, how, so, hopefully now you guys have a good sense that, okay, critical thinking is a very important skill. It's not something that is going to be taught in schools. It's something that companies value. Even if you want to start your own company, you will need this skill, right? But what we will do today is spend a substantial amount of time in understanding as to what actually stops us from making good decisions, right? We talked about earlier that we are, human beings. Human beings have a natural tendency, and especially in this day and age where there's so much social media that's out over there, right? So we are always in a rush to judge somebody or some ideas or make decisions quickly, right? So let's first and foremost go through what are the things that prohibit us, that actually stop us from making good decisions, right? And what we'll do is we'll take one kind of a case study and use that as kind of examples of what stops us. So again, let's pause over here and let's have a quick discussion. I'm sure all of you would agree, right, on this particular aspect. So let's get a quick, I would love to hear which cities are the participants on this call either coming from or living in, right? Because I'm sure you agree that traffic congestion in Indian cities is a pretty big problem. So, Pune, okay, I would agree. I have been to Pune multiple times, and it is a problem. Any other cities being represented on this call right now? More from Pune, okay. Chennai, yes, absolutely. Another city that has a problem. Bangalore, yes, I live in Bangalore, and obviously it is a problem. Nashik, I'm not sure actually. I wonder whether Nashik has a problem, but I would assume CBE is Coimbatore. Uh, though not as bad probably as like a Pune, Chennai, Bangalore. Yes, it is a problem. Coimbatore, Trichy, right? So as you can imagine, right, we all from all these different parts in the country. But if you look at the statement that is over here, I'm sure you all agree, right, that it is a major problem. So what I would like for you guys who are from all these different cities is to tell me, what do you think if you are given this problem, right? Come up for with a solution to reduce the traffic problem in your respective cities. Yeah. So now I want all the people who are from Pune, Chennai, Bangalore, Nashik, Coimbatore, Trichy, Delhi, Mumbai. Tell me, if you have been asked to solve this problem and come up with a solution to reduce the traffic in your respective city, what would you do? What is an idea that you might have to help solve this problem? What do you think? Come on. I'm sure each of you has at least one or two ideas that I would love to hear. So just type it into the chat about how you would go about solving this major problem that all of us encounter in our daily lives. I am waiting till I at least get some response. I'm sure, come on, you should have an idea, right? Okay, perfect. Santosh, thank you. So Santosh has two suggestions. We should widen the roads wherever, I'm assuming wherever possible. But yeah, if we had wider roads and we built flyovers, it would solve the problem. Okay, the other person says traffic congestion is mainly due to lack of knowledge about traffic rules and common civic sense and following the rules. Okay, Monish says let's build new bridges and reroute all the main ways in that traffic more than the traditional ways. Okay, good. Anybody else? So we've got some suggestions and ideas. I'm sure some of you had the same ideas, some may have different. Let's give it another half a minute and see if we have any more ideas on how we could go about solving this problem, right? Besides flyovers and bridges and widening of roads and rerouting traffics, maybe rerouting is, like what was tried out in Delhi, for instance, right? Odd days is odd number of car, whatever, the license plate ending in odd numbers, and even days is where your license plate ends in an even number. Okay, all right, so let's continue for now in the interest of time. So now that we've had discussions about this very relevant problem, right? Let's go through what we think will be some of the points you guys probably came up with, right? So here's the listing. I'm sure we came up with a few more, but let's take 6 of these, because these each actually pinpoint to, even though, right, they might be the right decision, right? Just as a knee-jerk reaction, if this was our solution, right, they actually point to a problem that actually exists that stops us from making good decisions, right? And what we have tried to do is come up with an acronym, really not really an acronym, but when we go through the techniques, we'll talk about this. There are 6 main things that stop us from making good decisions, right? And we call them A, B, C, D, E, F. Very simple to understand. So later on in life, whenever you think you are, either going to be making a design decision, an architecture decision, a life decision about purchasing some, very expensive things, one of the things you could do is, as you go through the decision, try and see, have you done any of A, B, C, D, E, F in your decision making? Because maybe that might have stopped you from making the correct decision, right? So let's start with, what is A, right? Very common, right? And these are assumptions, right? All of us are making assumptions at certain point in time, right? The problem is, your assumptions are very different than my assumptions, right? For instance, let's take a few examples of when assumptions have been made, right? If you all remember, Tata introduced, right, the Tata Nano car, right? Ratan Tata was very fond of this project, and he believed that Indians, right, and he saw this family on a two-wheeler with the dad, the mom, and 2 kids, and he felt like, Indian families actually need a protective car than going around in a two-wheeler, right? And so he came around with the Tata Nano, right? Unfortunately, for whatever reasons, right, it was not a huge success, right? And there was an assumption that he made while coming to this decision. What do you guys think was that assumption, right? Anyway, based on our discussions, one of the assumptions which was very, very wrong was that in a country like India, the car is a status symbol, right? So you buy a car not only for the benefits it provides, but it's also a status symbol. And so to go and buy a cheap car which is only worth 1 lakh rupees, right, goes against the fact that people look at it as a status symbol, right? So that was an assumption that was made, right? Another assumption, let's go through in COVID-19, right? When technology, when everybody was kind of locked up, we assumed, right? And there was a massive, massive investment, right? You guys know about the wave of technology that happened because everybody thought that everything is now going to move online, right? All classes will forever be online. All shopping will forever be online. Well, here we are in 2025, right? Just because we were faced with a situation that warranted us to come up with alternate solutions, and online shopping took off and online classes and education took off, did not mean that forever that would hold true. But a lot of investment decisions were made based on those assumptions, right? Another classical one is the Challenger, right? If you remember the Challenger disaster, and let's take a quick pause and discuss what you guys know about it and what was the assumption. Does anybody on this know about Challenger or know about what was the assumption made? What was the Challenger disaster? So any reference to it, if you know about, the Challenger disaster, or if you know what was the assumption made, would love to hear from you guys on the chat window, right? And Libak, I agree. Probably the problem with Nano was the way it was marketed, right? But there were certain assumptions made over there. But anyway, going back, anyone know about the Challenger? Right? It was one of the space shuttles that NASA sent off from Florida back many years ago. And all the astronauts who were a part of it unfortunately lost their lives within seconds of takeoff, right? And eventually, after NASA had spent years analyzing what the problem was, it turned out that such a major uh, disaster, right, was caused because of a very simple assumption. Anybody uh, remember or no? Okay, I'm happy to continue seeing the nano discussion ongoing between people. That's great. It's great to see the type of interaction that's happening here. Uh, but yeah, Monish, do you remember the exact details on Challenger? Anyways, in the interest of time, and I do realize that because this is a live stream, there is a little bit of a delay that does happen. Unfortunately, we do have to use live stream because we often at times are crossing the limits that Google places on Google Meet. But the challenger was the fact that the NASA team had always assumed that Florida temperatures, right, are between a certain range, right? And so all the testing that was done was always within those temperature ranges. And as it turned out, that wasn't necessarily true, correct? So let's continue. Okay, so yeah, that was a pretty big assumption that was made, right? That in Florida the temperature will always only be above a certain degree, and that particular day, right, the temperature was below, and so that was an assumption that was made that turned out into such a big disaster, right? So all across, there are so many numerous instances of assumptions that people make. So one of the practices you can get into, right, is whenever you are putting your viewpoint forward, you list down under what assumptions are you going ahead with your decision. right? So that will give the opportunity for the other side to have understood what your assumptions are, and they can probably counter and let you know what they are assuming, right? In the end, right, assume is a very common word, and that causes a problem. And why is that? Right? Because assume is, what is the spelling of assume? It stands for ASSUME, right? And so it inevitably ends up making an ass of you and me. So we want to try and avoid this pretty big mistake, right? Now, remember, we talked about the 6 potential solutions for our traffic problem, right? And so here is, right, if you had come up with, what, we need more flyovers and underpasses, and that will solve our problem, right? If you've come up with that solution within a minute of all the traffic problems in Indian cities, right, you are assuming that the flyovers will solve it, right? Even in a lot of tier 1 cities, for instances, a lot of flyovers have been built. Bombay, Mumbai, for instance, probably has like 70, 80, 90 flyovers, and yet the problems still persist, right? In fact, when you build flyovers, you probably are just moving the bottleneck from location A to either the end of the flyover where everybody is getting off, or maybe sometimes even when the flyover is starting, right? So unless and until you've really studied what is the real scenario, you might end up making a very bad assumption that only shifts the problem rather than solving it. Now, when you are working also, right, there will be many a times that you are presented with information, right? And your ability to identify that what is a fact, what is true, what is real data versus what is an assumption that you are making, right, can help you become a better decision maker, right? So let's look at this particular example. I'm going to pause so that we can have a discussion about it, and you can try and identify which is a fact and which is an assumption. So I would love for you guys to write down in the chat window, amongst these two things that are listed, right, which is a fact and which is an assumption, right? You can read the statement and decide for yourself. So type in your answers. I'm not going to wait because of the streaming thing. So it's very clear based on the statement that number 2 is a fact, right? And you are assuming that the two markets, right, which are, let's say you're launching in, I don't know, Indonesia, right? So if you go ahead with the assumption that Indian people and Indonesian people are very similar in their behaviors, that's an assumption, right? The statement that is given over here just has a fact that in India, right, TV commercials did result in good sales, right? So your ability to, whenever you read statements, whenever you hear people, to try and differentiate what are assumptions versus what are facts become very, very critical. Here's another example just to prove the fact, and just so that it becomes practice, let's pause and talk about this one. So what do you think? Again, I would love for you to this thing, like, is one a fact or is two a fact, or and obviously vice versa. So it says, I do not support telecommuting in our region. When we tried to implement this a few years ago, the initiative failed because of technology. People could not access the intranet when away from office, and the narrow bandwidth made it impossible to hold virtual meetings, right? The two statements are, the issues that prevented the successful rollout of telecommuting previously have not been resolved, right? So that And the second one is access to necessary technology has a great impact on the effectiveness of people working remotely. Yeah. So please decide for yourself which one is a fact and which one is an assumption. Okay, so we've talked about, the first mistake or the first thing that stops us from making good decisions. It is A for assumptions. Now let's talk about the second particular one, which is bias, right? Let's pause. What does bias mean to you? Just type in again, just to keep the interaction levels high. What do you understand or think when you hear the word bias? Okay, so in our particular example, right, we had this potential solution that some of you might have thought about, which is, what? Foreign countries are way better than us. They know how to solve problems. They know how to solve problems, first and well. And so let's just copy what works in America. Let's just copy what works in Singapore, and we will have solved the problem in India as well, right? Now, that is a bias that you have towards thinking that, and a lot of us have this, right, which is that everything in foreign countries is better, right? And as experience will tell you, that's not necessarily true, right? What you have to try and find is what is the right solution that might have been used abroad, and how and why will it work or not work in the Indian scenario, right? So that's a bias that we have. It's a confirmation bias. And, there are various different types of biases, right? But before we go ahead, I want to tell you a very interesting story to try and prove you this particular point about, how all of us, right, including me, and all of us in this world have a particular bias. So let's go through a story. Yeah. So there is this boy. He's 10 years old, and it is his birthday today. Okay. Now he has never ever traveled in a plane, right? And so what his dad decides is that, what, your 10th birthday, I'm going to make this very, very special for you, right? So I'm going to take you on a flight, right? So you will get a chance and an opportunity to go on a plane. And imagine this boy, right? Never been on a plane. He's so excited. He's getting this amazing birthday gift. Now, when he enters the plane, he realizes that his dad has actually bought him business class seats, right? So he sits in business class and is just thrilled and super happy, right? The plane takes off. After a while, the air hostess comes out and brings a cake, and they light the cake and they sing happy birthday for him, and he cuts the cake. And can you imagine this 10-year-old boy, first time on a plane, getting the special treatment in business class, cutting the cake, right? And about 15 minutes later, the air hostess comes and asks the boy, do you want to go and see the cockpit? Now imagine the excitement of this boy. And he's like, yes, I want to go, right? So he's taken to the cockpit. He spends about 2 minutes over there, looks at the dashboard, looks at everything, and comes back and sits down and is just like, this is the happiest day of my life, right? Now, as soon as he leaves the plane, the cockpit, the pilot turns to the co-pilot, right, and says, that is my son. So how did that happen, right? Because the boy returned back and sat next to his father when he came back from the cockpit. So let's pause and think about that. So, as you might have imagined, most of us are unable to get this answer, which is that, the pilot was his mother, right? And especially in a country where which has the maximum number of women pilots, right? So this is a bias that exists, right, in a lot of us, where we are unable to get to the answer, right? So we have this in our head that if it's a teacher, it has to be a woman. right? If it is a nurse, it has to be a woman, right? So these are biases that exist that we live with, right? Now, the reason that I obviously tried to make this story very long was many a times when you have so much information, right? And extra information, you can't just go and identify the bias easily, right? Because you are lost in this tons of information or data around you, right? So anyways, some of the biases, and I'm not going to go through each of them, right? Group think, for instance, right? If you are in a team and team of 6 people and 5 of them are saying the answer is A and you think the answer is B, a lot of us might actually say the answer is A, right? Because we feel like, I would rather be with the group, with the team, and get my answer wrong than be alone and right? So that is the pressure of kind of conforming to group think, right? Confirmation bias, right? So if we believe in something and if one person confirms that, we are like, yes, yes, that is the bias, right? Hindsight is later on we will be like, see, I told you India was going to lose that match, right? It's kind of after Y2K happened, everybody said, oh, I knew that there was not going to be a big problem. But before Y2K, the whole world went crazy trying to solve the problem, right? So many bubbles that happen after the fact, people say, you know what, I told you so, right? And so similarly, biases, right, do exist. For instance, there was this particularly interesting case of, Hyundai and Kia, right? When they first entered the US market, right, they were facing a bias where the American customer did not want to buy Korean cars because they were like, these are Korean cars, the quality may not be good, right? And so Hyundai actually had to come up with an amazing strategy, right? Their strategy was they came out with a 10-year warranty of the car. Till that time, all cars that were sold in America gave either a 3-year or a 5-year warranty. But Hyundai, in order to fight the bias that the American customer had, right, came up with a 10-year warranty, right? So sometimes companies have to fight these biases in order to overcome things. Okay. So we've covered two of the things that stop us from making good decisions. A for, B for. So now let's go to what is C, right? And it's a very, very common mistake, right? It's called correlation versus causation. So let's pause again to see if any of you understand or can explain this. So we'll wait over here. Let's see if anybody has an idea. What is the difference? What does each word mean? If you know even one word, what it means, just type out your answer in terms of, and this is especially very, very true in the corporate world, right? Because you spend a lot of time analyzing data. And the big mistake that keeps happening is what is listed here. So I would love to see if anyone has an idea. Type it into the chat window and we'll continue from there. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so in our particular example, right, the use case, right, we have this where, we always assume that, what, more cars are being sold. And so that's why traffic is increasing, right? We might overlook other factors, right? And we just straight away jump to traffic is getting worse because, more cars are being sold. Now, that may be true in some cases and in some cities, but Does it apply globally? Does it apply to every single city, even like tier 2 or a tier 3 city where car sales are zooming? If you see traffic problems, or if you don't see traffic problems, right? So just jumping and confusing, right? Because what tends to happen, as we talked about, was when two things go up at the same time, they may be correlated because of them moving in the same direction, but it does not necessarily mean that A is causing B or B is causing A, right? And many times we make this mistake, right? And we've got to be careful about it, right? So one of the classic examples that people talk about is, ice cream sales in summer go through the roof. Is that correlation or causation? What do you guys think? Yeah, so obviously this particular example, makes sense in terms of it was causing, right? Because summer people want to eat something cold, right? But even today, right now, we are going through a situation, right, where jobs in the tech market are under a lot of pressure, right? A lot of layoffs are happening, right? And a natural reaction that people have is that, oh, this is AI. AI is causing people to do layoffs, right? But do we really know if that is true? We don't know that necessarily, right? AI could be causing it, but there are so many other factors. For instance, I could argue that, what we talked about COVID. When COVID happened, people felt that technology was going to be the panacea, technology was going to solve all problems, and so a lot of money, right, that the US and the Western countries had printed moved to tech. And so there was a lot of hiring done. It was over hiring. And then as companies in 23 and 2024 had to shift to showing profitability, right? They realized that they had overhired, and so they started doing layoffs. I mean, that's a possible reason why layoffs are starting to happen, right? We don't know, right? So the jury is still out whether AI is causing the job losses or layoffs right now, right? But there is this correlation coefficient, right? So zero means they are not at all correlated, right? Sometimes it can go up, sometimes the other can go down, right? A perfect correlation of one, obviously something like temperature in centigrade and Fahrenheit, right? When one goes up, the other goes up, and it goes up exactly by the same, right? Then here's a beautiful example, right? Parents who are alcoholic, right? Their children tend to not do well in schools and colleges, right? They have low academic achievement. What do you think? Is the alcoholism of the parent causing, or are they just correlated and they don't have, any kind of cause effect? What do you think? And I'm sure each of you probably have, your experiences, probably have neighbors that might be having such a situation, right? And so again, somebody, if you have seen that that is exactly true, even if it is just one situation, you will say absolutely it is being caused because of that. But in some other situation or some other family, you might have the opposite, which is the child is doing exceptionally well academically, even though the parents are have an alcohol addiction, right? So this all, whether it is exactly one or not at all, in the end, unless we look at the data, right, we will make judgments based on what we have experienced or what we have seen with our neighbors, right? And so that also becomes an important factor before reaching a conclusion that they are causing or they are correlated, and by how much. Okay, so here's another good example, right? There is a belief in a lot of people that autism, right, in children has gone up. And let's leave this example. Actually, let's take a very current example, right? And we don't know because there's a lot of research that is going on, right? Which is that depending on the number of COVID vaccines individuals may have taken, we are starting to see a rise in heart attacks in much younger people. You probably have heard, I have heard of many examples of people in their 40s, right, and 50s getting a heart attack, which wasn't the case before COVID, right? It was fairly rare. So, is the COVID vaccine that is causing heart attacks to go up, or are they just correlated and there's something else that we haven't studied, right? So research is still out, is still ongoing, right? And so here is, we have this particular example, but all the time there is a very common mistake that we make about confusing correlation and causation. Yeah. So we've gone through A, B, and C, right? And let's move on to another factor, which is D. What do you think D is, right? And D is something that we often at times talk about, that the more of that we have, the better the decision will be. But many a times we misinterpret data, right? So while data is good, like having a much clearer, better understanding will always help you. And I'll give you a personal example with regards to data, right? So I work very closely with this Indonesian e-commerce company, right? Where for a while, we used to focus, and there's an obsession always about companies to kind of focus on their competition, right? So we used to focus and say that, you know what, if you look at app time, which is a customer spending, how much time is he spending on our app, right, is very, very less. It's like, I don't know, an average of like 2 minutes. But if you look at the app time that customers spend on our competitors, they are spending 8 minutes, 9 minutes. So we started saying that, our metric of determining success needs to be increasing the amount of time that the customer spends on our app. And so we built a lot of features like gamification, came out with games and challenges, right, to keep the customer engaged, right? Now, it was only at a later point in time, when we were having another discussion, that we came to the realization that there is also a very big difference between the type of customers that we have and the type of customers that our competitor is serving, right? So if you were to look at the pyramid, right, our competitors were focused more on the bottom of the pyramid, right? They were selling cheap products for everybody, right? So very small, simple, cheap products, while we were focused more on the middle and the top middle, right, which is more expensive products, right? And so that was because our customer base were professionals, were people who didn't have much time, right? So for them, they needed to use the app to search for something, add it to the shopping cart, pay the money, and check out and move, right? They didn't have hours and hours to just sit and play and surf and look for, cheap lipsticks or cheap fashion products, right? So there is an example of misrepresenting, misunderstanding how to use data, right? So the data was right. The data was not wrong. They were, our competitors, customers were spending more time on their app, but having a better understanding. So even if the data was right, misunderstanding or misrepresentation can cause a problem, right? Now, in our particular case, for instance, right, what some of us could have come up with, there are just way too many accidents, right? And so traffic has gotten bad because of accidents, because of the way people are driving, right? Now, it is possible, right? And so somebody may come up with a solution that, you know what, for every accident or every violation, let's have, let's increase the fine from 300 rupees to 2000 rupees, right? Now, that could be an approach, but is that the right decision that you are making, right? So you can't really come to such conclusions very quickly, right? So that's a good example of it, right? Now, the other thing to also remember is, how is this data presented, right? So here's an example. Let's pause and discuss. So So, if you were to look at this statement and had to make a decision of whether to use this drug or no, right? Based on which statement do you think you will go ahead and decide and say that, oh, yeah, this is a great drug, let's start using it, right? Just type in your answer. If you read statement one, are you more likely to use the drug? Or if you read statement two, right? Interestingly, as we analyze the data, they're actually saying the same thing, right? They're actually looking at the same data, right? And this is the problem that we do have, and why often at times, right, marketing gets a bad name, because marketing is all about presenting the data in a form such that it becomes more attractive, right? You look at and say, oh, it's reduced by 50%. Anybody is going to say, yeah, yeah, let's take the drug, right? If you look at it and say, oh, it only went from 6% to 3%, well, that's a small drop, you might feel, but they are both saying the same thing, right? And so always be careful when even analyzing the data, to understand and know, what is the baseline when you are analyzing the data. If the data, if I had only seen at the first statement, I would have been like, oh, let's take this drug, right? But if I had realized and seen and gone in deeper to understand that really one also means two, right? So it is factually accurate, but it's not really showing that much benefits, right? So, even the way that the information is presented to the customer can make customers kind of realize, and so many times you need to study the data, right? But then at the same time, you don't want to get into the mistake that, you know what, no, 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 I don't have enough data, I need more time, I need more time. And so you elongate, you lengthen the amount of time that you take to make the decision, right? And so but remember that it is not always necessary that the more data you have, the better the decision, right? So here is a research paper where the performance, right, or the right decision was really the same, even after you had collected 5 pieces of information or after you had collected 40 pieces of information. Now, the person who was doing it felt more confident after 40 pieces of information were given to him versus when he had only 5 pieces, right? But if that the amount of time it needed for us to go from 5 to 40 had been like 6 months, was it worth it, right? You don't know. So again, I'm not saying that, less data or quick decision making, but you need to know what is the right amount of data and how much data is good enough for you to have come to the right decision. Yeah. So we've covered A, B, C, and D, right? The 4 mistakes that stop us from making good decisions. And now let's go to E, right? Which is emotions, right? And many times, especially in the day and age of social media, right? Emotions get in the way. And especially there are certain topics, right? Where emotions play a very high role, right? So what do you think those are? Let's pause. So I'll wait. Can you think of certain topics that can get extremely emotional while talking to people, and so you need to kind of up your guard? Um, there are certain, categories that you really want to always avoid, actually. Or if you are in the midst of that, be even more careful than normal. Looking for some inputs from you guys on things to be aware of, where people can get very, very emotional about it. Okay, so remember that politics, ideologies, religion, right? They can become extremely emotional, right? And so you've got to be careful about not letting emotions, jump, make you kind of decide something. For instance, you might be a very big fan of, let's say, I don't know, let's pick a cricketer or a movie star, right? And you are emotionally tied to him. Now, if that person comes and is advertising and telling you, buy this car or buy these tires, would you go and buy something just because a Mahendra Singh Dhoni or a Virat Kohli is telling you to buy that car, right? That is, you're letting your emotions get the better of you, right? And companies know that, right? And that's why when you look at ads for like a toothpaste like Colgate, right, you will see the actor wearing a white coat, right? Because they are appealing to your emotions that the doctor, the dentist knows well. Really, you don't know whether that person who's in front of you asking you to purchase Colgate, is he or she an actor, or is he or she a real dentist who's been practicing for 20 years, right? So be careful about emotions running you, right? And then in our particular example, right, like you might just get frustrated, right? And you might say, you know what, I'm frustrated, let's just do this. Odd cars will drive in the city on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and even cars will drive on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. That's it, right? So you are letting your frustration make a decision. Now it's possible that that could be a solution, but just without analyzing, without looking at data, without thinking through, without spreading yourself in terms of more information, right? You can't really allow frustration to take root in terms of your decision, right? And so remember to avoid emotions making your decision, right? So somebody who's a smoker, right, says that, you know what, I knew somebody who was 80 years old and he used to smoke. So that means that, smoking is not harmful because this person lived to 80, right? Because you are a smoker, you might use that argument, right? It's an emotional argument of using anecdotes or one piece of information or data to say that it's okay to smoke. All this talk or all this data is incorrect, that smoking is harmful. Yeah. So that is again another example of emotions running or making the decisions for you. Okay. All right, so we've gone through A, B, C, D, E, and now we will go to the final one, which is F, which is the final one, jumping to conclusions, right? As we said, there is this very famous book, right? Which you should, if somebody is a book reader, called Thinking Fast and Slow, right? And Daniel Kahneman, who got the Nobel Prize for that, talks about this system one and system two, right? And he says that most of our decisions are always system one, which are impulsive decisions, which are jumping to conclusions, which are making quick decisions, right? And as we've said many a times, right, in this day of social media, right, it is a natural phenomena for us, right, to kind of make these kind of decisions, right? Many times in tech teams that I have had, right, there is a, when we go to the team and say, hey, this problem exists, right, the natural reaction of many teams is, oh, that is because the customer doesn't understand it, or the customer service didn't understand it, or the sales guy sold it wrong, or the partner's SDK is wrong, or the internet connectivity in that customer, right? So always trying to point quickly that the problem is somebody else's, somewhere else's. It's not my code, right? You can become, and so be watchful of demonstrating this kind of a behavior, right? And in our particular case, right, two-wheelers, right, somebody who's driving a two-wheeler is going to say it's the four-wheelers that are causing traffic problems, and the four-wheeler is going to be like, it's the two-wheelers, right, they just jump in and out, are maneuvering and going left right without indication, and it's they who are causing the problems, right? So that's a, again, jumping to a conclusion can be a failure in terms of making the right, correct decision, right? We talked about making a decision based on your favorite actor or actress kind of encouraging you to make a call or a decision. But anyway, so let's pause and quickly revise what are, and the reason that jumping to conclusions is because our brain sometimes is always trying to get to a quick decision, right? And here's an example of the trick that our brain can play with us. So here's another example, right, of quickly jumping to conclusion. Let's discuss. What do you think? So, would love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think is a problem here? So we have gone through the 6 different reasons that we are unable to make good decisions. Let's revise them. Let's pause and let's see if you guys have anything to kind of add to this. So, just to make sure we've all gotten the first step towards becoming a better decision maker in life, right? And these are obviously whenever you are making a very thought through decision, right? Sometimes obviously you have to make quick decisions because you're under pressure, under immense stress to try and quickly decide. But if you are making decisions about whatever, buying a house, buying a car, an architectural decision at work, or a design decision for the next feature, after you've gone through your thought process, make sure that you pause and revise and make sure that in your decision making, did you use any of these factors, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, that have actually stopped you and probably moved you in a direction where the decision may be incorrect, right? Just so that's the first step. Every time you are going through a decision making, say, why might I have made a wrong decision? It could be because of A, B, C, D, E, F. And look through if you are making any of those mistakes, right? Okay, so now that we know about what stops us, right, always remember, when if you have time, and if you are going through, right, what should you do such that you make a good decision for yourself, right? The first thing is try and understand what the problem is, right? What is the question that you are trying to answer, right? And so You start at some point, right? You understand, make sure you are not going after the wrong problem, or you're not trying to answer the wrong question, right? And then you kind of diverge, right? Which is, you go around, you start researching, you collect as much information as possible, get as much data as possible. So you start collecting till you've reached a point where you feel like, okay, I have enough information and data, right? And so then you start analyzing it, right? So you organize yourself, you distill what is the right piece of information, what is not, right? And then you start kind of, okay, what is going to be the decision point, and how do you converge, right? And also explore, okay, if I am thinking it's solution A, is there a solution B? Is there a solution C? Right? And we'll go through these techniques, right? We'll talk of two or three more techniques that can help us to make sure that we've analyzed all possible solutions and then are coming to our decision of which is the best decision, right? So remember, your starting point, understand what is the problem, go out there, collect as much information, analyze the information, and then try and move towards your decision point, right? That is something that you can use, right? And today we are going to go through three different approaches, okay, as to how you can present your decision and how do you go about it, right? And then the fourth one, as we said, the mental models. There are many of them, right? There are like probably 50, 100 of them, and we'll cover a few of them in later semesters, right? So if you have an interest, you can start understanding them, but let's go through the first three in the remaining time that we have today with us, right? So the first one is, when you go through and you have come up with, right, it's not only that, okay, here's my final solution, here's my decision, right? What you talk about is potentially saying, you know what, there are two different solutions or three different solutions, right? And here are the pros, the cons, and the data and inputs that I have used to analyze each of this. And this is why I am suggesting, right? So let's pause and talk about what do you understand this approach might be, in terms of what are pros, what are cons, what are the data and inputs. Okay, so I'll wait. Would love to hear. I think most of you should know, but still, just to make sure we understand, just type in, when we say pros, right? What do you mean by that? When you say cons, right? What do you mean by that, right? What is your understanding of that terminology? Okay, so now that we've gone through, let's take our traffic example, yeah? And let's take, I'm not going to go through, so just so that we are clear, right? When we say pros, we are essentially talking of what are the advantages of this solution, or what are the advantages of this approach, right? Cons means what are the disadvantages or negative points about this approach. Because if you have two or three solutions, right, if obviously one solution is giving you all the pros and there are no cons, then there is no need to really evaluate and spend time on solution two or three, right? But most things in life, right, there is a balance that you're looking for. And so you do need to make sure that you have understood what are the advantages of solution one, what are the disadvantages of solution one, what are the advantages of going with solution two, what are the potential pitfalls or the negative points or the cons of solution two, right? All the solutions that we had come up with, but let's take one particular solution, which is a lot of people always kind of go naturally, right? Which is that, to improve the traffic situation in this city, we need to get more public transportation, which is let's get more buses or trains or metros, right? Now, what are the pros, right? What are the advantages of public transportation, right? Obviously, it reduces people having private vehicles, right? It also obviously will be cheaper. It makes it affordable. It allows, people of lower strata to travel using public transportation, right? And then obviously, sustainability, right? It's much more eco-friendly, less pollution. So those are kind of the advantages of public transportation, right? Now, what are the cons? For instance, especially metro, right? It isn't cheap, right? They are fairly expensive, right? So unless you have the budget, unless you have the money to invest in this infrastructure, right? It's not going to be easy. The second is it's going to take time, right? Metros are not like they can come up overnight, right? And building these metro, either underground or overground, right? And then it requires constant maintenance and the hassles when you are building the metro. For instance, if we decide to go with the metro, right, the traffic situation while the metro is being constructed for the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years that it could take to build a metro in a city, right? And also, public perception, right? Because we've talked about, for instance, status symbol. A lot of us rely on, what are people going to think about us if I go by a bus or a metro, right? So those are kind of the cons, right? Now, so we will need, right, some data and inputs that will allow us to figure out whether metro is the right solution, right? So for instance, you might say that we do have some buses. Can I get the information of which buses on which lines, on which which points from point A to point B is their maximum, and so where should the metro even be built, right? What are the commuting habits? Do people travel very early in the city, very late? What are the peak times? And then how much is it going to cost, and how much maximum ridership will we get? So there are many different data points that you might either need or might have analyzed before you come up with this potential solution or suggestion, or answer to the question, right? I'm going to skip this one, but let's take another solution that you come up with to solve traffic management strategies, right? Is saying that, what, we need better traffic management, right? So the advantage of better traffic management is you are going to continue to rely on the current road infrastructure, right? You might say that, what, we will use AI, right, and cameras and look at traffic. And based on if we see a lot of traffic a particular way, we will turn the signals green for a longer period of time, right? And the opposite way might be for a lesser period of time, it becomes red or green, right? So anyways, we are not going to go through each of these because this can be a very long-winded discussion. But suffice it to say that as whenever you are presenting, right, your solution or your approaches towards solving this problem, when you're presenting it, if you present it as here are the advantages of this solution, here are the disadvantages, and here are the data points, right? So you say, when you present to your team leader or to your team, and you come back and say, what, there are 3 solutions. Here is the advantage of solution 1, here is the disadvantage of solution 1, here is the data and inputs that I use to analyze it, here's that for 2, solution 3, right? And based on this, I am recommending that we go with solution 1, and here is why, right? That will demonstrate that you as a team member have extremely good critical thinking capabilities and skills, and hence you get the opportunity of solving more difficult problems, taking on more responsibilities, and you are demonstrating your thinking abilities, right? So Here's, how can we improve, maybe one solution is, let's go with carpooling and ride sharing, right? That is another way. And maybe your suggestion might be, what, um, for instance, we said A was, let's build public transport, and the solution was building metros because you can't have, a rapid transit bus system. The second suggestion was, improving the traffic management, and then the third was, let's do carpooling, right? Now, and then after you analyze, you realize that this city actually doesn't have much of a budget, right? And hence, or if you need state approval and center approval, it's going to take, you know 15 months to get the approval, right? And so what do you do till then? Even 15 months is for the start, right? After that, it might be another 5 years, so you're talking 6 years, right? And so the solution for now is really go with the better traffic management and carpooling, right? So you have to consider these factors and present your viewpoints, right? So that was, as we talked about, approach number one, right? Which is looking at the pros, the cons, and then presenting your suggestion or solution. Okay. Now let's go to approach two, right? Which is again very similar, but just a different way of presenting your data, right? Which is, it's called compare, contrast, analyze, categorize, and evaluate. Okay. And you can pick whatever you think, right, depending on the situation. So let's pause, and talk about, what does compare and contrast mean? So, what do you guys think? We talked about pros and cons, and I did see some people, Rakshana, Suganti, Munish, kind of get their answers, which is great. So I'm kind of curious, if you hear the term compare and contrast, right? What comes to your mind? What could be the differences or the similarity between them, right? Okay, so let's go to this one, right? And before we go to our case study, I'll give you a particular very simple example, right? Let's take that you wanted, in your class. Let's take an example of World War I versus World War II, right? Can you do these five for these two world wars, right? We can either pause over here and do a discussion depending upon the amount of time. So, given the fact that we do have this streaming issue where, as you guys kind of type in, it does come in a little delayed to me, but just to keep the interaction going, and I do see some people are fairly active and do appreciate, all of you who, Libak and Rakshana, Suganthi, Abhi, and people. Maybe you could your thoughts on, if you were to analyze the two world wars that took place, right? And you had to do a compare, contrast, analyze, categorize, and evaluate, what would it be, right? So feel free to type in your answers or share what and how you would go about doing it for the two world wars. Or, I'll give you some quick examples, right? So for instance, when you compare the first and second world war, right, what were the similarities? Basically, it was centered around Europe, and in both World War I and World War II, the US came in a little later, right? So primarily, both World War I and World War II were European players, with later joined by the US, right? And I think, just to make sure people have understood, because I might have missed the point here, right? So compare is kind of talking about the similarities between the approaches, and contrast is talking about the differences between the two solutions, right? So compare and contrast generally mean the similarities and the differences between the two. Now, if you wanted to do a contrast, which is what were the differences between the two world wars, right? In World War One, France was never completely taken. Paris never fell, right? While in World War Two, actually, France and Paris falling was one of the immediate effects in World War Two, right? So that's a contrast of the two. If you were to analyze, right, you can break it down and say, in World War II, there was also, you had Europe, but then you also had Japan and China. And so there was the Pacific theater, and there were different areas that were controlled differently, right? So you're starting to analyze that World War II was a much bigger one, and giving more information, analyzing it against World War One, right? If you wanted to categorize, you can categorize different wars and say there are regional wars, there are world wars, and there are internal wars, right? Which is somebody is trying to secede from a country, right? So you can have internal wars that are happening within a country as well. So that is how you categorize the different types of wars, right? And if you are evaluating, you can say, obviously, both the world wars were not good, right? Because obviously of so much chaos, so much destruction, so much death. But then, there were some positives as well, right? Radar was developed during World War II. Penicillin came up, computers and technology, right? And so those were kind of some of the benefits also, right? Whether we like it or not, right? So that's a way of evaluating the different world wars, right? Now let's go back to our example, right? For instances, right? So when you take public transportation, right? And again, I've not covered all of them, and we're going to jump through them because there's just a lot of information that is over here, right? But if you say that you want to enhance public transportation, right, and then you can compare it, right, to non-motorized transport, which was a solution that we didn't cover, right? Or you can even compare it, we talked about at least traffic management and carpooling, right? So you can say that compared to traffic management, if you enhance public transportation, you're actually solving the root cause, right? While traffic management is kind of like a workaround, right? And comparing it to carpooling, right, it is public transportation is a much more structured and potentially affordable for many, right? Not everybody can afford carpooling, for instance, right? So here you are comparing one solution with the other options you have, right? And then you can similarly contrast, right? So public transportation versus traffic management, right? Public transportation obviously requires a massive amount of investment upfront and then constant ongoing maintenance, right? But traffic management really doesn't require that much massive investment, right? Same goes for carpooling and ride sharing when you want to contrast the two, right? And so same way, right, like just like we discussed about pros and cons and data and inputs, right, you can do a comparison, contrast, analyze, evaluate of the various different solutions that you have. Again, as I said, I'm not going to go through each of them because there's a lot, but just trying to give you a sense of when you are presenting your data, right, or information or solution, how can you come across, right, as being well thought through, structured in your approach, good analysis, good critical thinking, right? And then how do you present that data, right? So let's talk about presenting this data. And again, as I said, I'm going to skip through a lot of these slides, right? Here is a way that, for instance, you might have seen this, right? So this is, right, if you wanted to, for instance, compare and contrast Netflix and Prime Video. How could you present this piece of information, right? Let's say, your problem is, should we go with Netflix or Prime Video, right? How do you present the information such that it becomes easy for your audience to digest it, right? And this is a beautiful example of different points of information that are presented in a tabular fashion that make it very easy for you to compare and then decide what do you want to go for. And here's another way, right, especially for marketing and sales, right, that you might see, right? So what you are seeing, right, is when you have to present your data or present your analysis, right? Because as we said, remember, you start, you go off, collect tons and tons of information, tons of data, do your research, do your analysis, and then you kind of come back to your decision point, right? So these are just different ways that you could use to demonstrate as to how you have finally come up with your decision, and in a very short summarized fashion, tabular fashion especially, right? Tables are beautiful ways of showing the difference between different options that you might have, right? So that's kind of again, analyzing it. So if we go back, right, we talked about approach one was the pros and the cons, and then the other one was how can you compare and contrast and provide it in a very tabular. And then we are going to go to the third way and actually talk about um, you know let's take a simple example which might be a real use case for you, right? So let's pause over here. And before we pause, right, let's just assume that you are trying to convince your parents of buying a two-wheeler, right? Obviously, one natural phenomena is we approach our parents and say, oh, my friend has a two-wheeler, so why can't I get a two-wheeler, right? That's how you will go to talk to your mom or your dad, right? And try and use emotions, right? If my friends have it, why can't I have it? Neighbor's son has it, why can't I get it? you know and you start using emotions while trying to argue with your parents, right? Saying that I need a two wheeler, right? But do you think that way your parents are going to be convinced that they should be buying a two wheeler for you, right? So what do you think? How, based on whatever we have studied till now, right, can you go about providing that information, right? So let's pause for a bit, let's have a discussion, and let's have you guys share your thoughts on solving this potentially real world problem of convincing our parents. So I'll wait for you guys to type it in, right? We've kind of talked about certain things, about certain techniques, right? And here's a real life scenario. What would you do now, given that you've been exposed to two or three approaches of, how to go about making these decisions? What could you do now, right? You want that two wheeler, you want it desperately. Okay. So Dhaya says focus on demonstrating responsibility, highlighting safety features, and addressing their concerns. Beautiful, right? Mohammed says, yeah, talk about safety, right? Good, keep it coming. Great to see these, and I think they're very relevant. And I think especially the point about trying to focus on their concerns, right? Because for the most part, the reason your parents may be resisting, right, are really two things. One is, what is going to be the cost of buying a two wheeler, and most importantly, I am worried about the safety of you taking a two-wheeler, right? So that those two are really the most important factors that you need to take into consideration and make sure that when you are trying to convince your parents, those get addressed. Because if those are not going to get addressed, right, then you don't have much of a chance of convincing either of them. Okay, so Monish says that I've been changing three buses daily to get to work or college. I want a two-wheeler to go tired, free, and with no rush. Sure, that could be an argument, right? So you start by saying, right, one of the things you could start by saying is that, I am wasting, or I'm not wasting, but I spend typically about 45 minutes to an hour traveling to the college, and then it takes me another hour to kind of get back, right? So I have thought of how I could potentially save that time so that I can focus more on my studies, or I could focus and be home more often, right? So Shriman says, sir, when we get to your, okay, I talk about that later. True. Suganti says, talk about not comparing with others and understanding the family situation, giving valid reasons of enhancing. True. Good points, everybody. Right. So essentially, what you want to do is talk about the benefits, right, of getting a two-wheeler, saving time, maybe getting more time to study, maybe getting more time to spend at home with the family, right? And having analyzed, besides the benefits or the advantages, right, I have gone ahead and done a comparison of, I don't know, two or three different models, right? And let's continue for now, but I'm glad to see a lot of the points that you guys are raising over here, which are very relevant and very valid. Okay, so hopefully you guys have understood, and I'm going to give you another or additional viewpoints to kind of just basically demonstrate, right, that you are a critical thinker and can really, right? So one is obviously you have various different points, right? But then, right? So for instance, if you are presenting your analysis to your parents, right? Remember, when you go with something like this, which is, instead of going emotionally and telling mom, or trying to first convince your mom and then tell mom, you help me to convince dad or whatever, right? If you say that, okay, you know what, i have I have analyzed, and here are the benefits, right? If we get a two-wheeler, right, I can cut down and I can get an additional 1.5 hours at home, because the travel time reduces from 1 hour to by bus to 15 minutes, right? Here are the downsides or the cons of buying a two-wheeler, right? And then you go and say, I have looked at all the bikes in the market, and obviously, right, here are the categories based on which we should evaluate buying a car, right? And since you're convincing your parents, remember that what was the most important reason, right, why they don't want to. What are the two most important things which why parents don't want to buy, right? First is obviously the safety, right? And then the second are the costs, right? So if you give higher weightages to things that matter for your parents, you have a better shot, right? But just now imagine the two different techniques, right? Either using emotions to convince your parents, versus show them that you are a mature individual. You now go to college, and here are the benefits, right? You have a better shot at it, right? So we just wanted to use a fun example to try and convince you about, every time that you are trying to get decisions made or make a decision, when you take your time and put it on paper in a well thought out, structured manner, you will always have a better shot at kind of becoming a better critical thinker. right? So, and just to reiterate, right, what we just showed, interestingly, about I think about 5 years ago at our company, we were at a similar point, right? Which is we used to have our own data centers, we used to host all the servers, and we were going through a decision point of evaluating and moving between, either should we move to AWS, should we move to GCP, or should we move to Azure, right? And so really we just listed down the whatever 15 or 16 different factors that would have influenced our decision, right? And upfront, before we started doing like a POC, which is called a proof of concept, right, we came up with all the factors, we gave weightages, right? Because depending on our company, what was going to be most important in terms of which cloud provider to pick, right? And then for each category, besides the weightage, we came up with the 15, 20, 30 different points that we needed to look at and evaluate or grade, right? And so eventually we ended up with about 300, 350 bullet points, right? But they would all kind of aggregate into a category which had a weightage. And thus, right, we felt that after we were done with the exercise, we had done a good structured approach to arrive at our decision point of which cloud provider to pick, right? Versus being either ad hoc or being emotionally driven by does Google give more promotion, or does Amazon give more, right? So even in companies on a day-to-day basis, this technique, for instance, of first taking a problem, figuring out advantages and disadvantages, and then coming up with the categories of differences, giving weightages to those categories, and then for each category, going and having what are the subcategories or the points that need to be evaluated in a POC, is a very common technique that is used in the industry. Just a final 2 3 slides. Yeah. So what are tips, right, on how can you become a better critical thinker, right? Always, even if, right, you have come up with, right, at least trying to spend time and say, but what if something doesn't happen, right? So for instance, here is a classical sales, right? The company says, you know what, our sales have been going down, but we are going to do ABC and our sales are going to go through the roof. So this is what is going to happen, right? And so if you sit over there and ask the salesperson, what if so the marketing team has come up and said, we are going to create this viral social media, and after that our sales are going to go through the roof, right? And so if you are the only one person who sits over there and says, what if that video doesn't go viral, right? Imagine everybody, oh yeah, what if that happens, right? So always after your decisions are made, kind of think about what if scenarios, right? Remember that what you are trying to do is get to the best decision at that point in time, right? You can never foresee what might happen. Things will change. Your competitors may adopt a new strategy. New technology might come up which just changes everything, right? So decision that you are making is the best decision today at this point in time, based on the information we have. If we get new information, we might need to go back to the drawing table and re-evaluate our decision and might need to change, right? And companies or individuals that are willing to do that, right, will always be able to adjust, right? And then the next one, right? Obviously, you have to be honest to yourself. And if you have made a wrong decision, or if you have misinterpreted the data, right? Good critical thinkers are people who will admit their fault and say, you know what, I made a mistake over there. I was wrong when I thought that more app downloads will result in more sales happening, right? So that is another good characteristic to have, right? And then if you want to become a critical thinker, a better critical thinker, remember that when you disagree with either your boss or your team lead or your team member, right? If in your head you realize that I am disagreeing with this person's idea, right? I'm not disagreeing with him. I'm just disagreeing with the idea and your ability, right? And we'll talk about this in articulation, right? How do you put forward your points when you want to disagree, right? Your tone, the manner in which you speak, right? And without getting emotionally charged up will help you become better at this, right? One of the best ways of doing it is actually any idea that you have, right? If you are able to present it to a 6 year old or a 5 year old, if you are able to make a 6 year old understand your idea, then you have really understood your idea well, right? So do that. Try and practice this by saying, I'm going to take a 6 year old and try and explain it to him, because he will have, some maybe stupid questions, maybe things that, oh my God, yeah, when I'm presenting it, I should probably make sure that I talk about this, right? And then remember, always go through, are you making the mistake of A, B, C, D, E, or F, right? So these are ways that you can use to help improve your critical thinking, right? And then finally, right, how can you as an individual, right, your ability to be open minded, right, your ability to realize that, the decision that I come up with will never be the best decision forever. I am trying to come up with the best decision at this particular point in mind. Maybe I will make mistakes. Maybe I might be wrong, right? And it is okay. And I need to be open that if some new information comes in, or something new I understand that makes the decision I made yesterday wrong, it is okay, right? So being open minded and admitting that all of us in the end are human beings, we all make mistakes, right? The courage to take initiative is just the fact that, many a times we are afraid to volunteer, right? And say, if let's say you are in a team meeting where a particular problem is being discussed, right? The person who takes the initiative and say, oh, can I go and analyze this situation as to why, our app ratings are going down, and come back and present, right? They are the people who are being proactive, who are taking the initiative, and they are going to be the people who have a much better chance at being successful, right? We talked about, biases and prejudices, right? Confronting problems and challenges, and then even remembering that when somebody disagrees with you, especially in a public forum, right? Don't take it personally. They are not attacking you. They are attacking your idea or your thoughts. And then finally, the one which is extremely difficult, right, for our cultures, which is cultures in India, right? We've grown up in a culture where it's almost impossible to disagree with your teacher or disagree with your boss, right? Or disagree with a group of people. And that is what actually stops us as Indians, as Eastern cultures, from coming up with new ideas, new innovations, right? So we need to get rid of these cultural nuances, because remember, we are arguing about an idea so that we can come up with a better idea, right? And so it is okay to disagree, right? Because maybe in these disagreements, maybe in these debates, maybe in these discussions, right, we will come up with a better solution, with a better design, with a better product that is much more useful for our customers, right? So these are individual traits that if you want to become a better critical thinker, you need to imbibe and try and practice. Yeah. Now, as just a last final exercise, let's do a fun puzzle or a quiz and see what you think the answer for this is. Okay, so what do you guys think? Would love to get the answers, right? Bacteria doubles every 24 hours to fill up a lake it has infested after precisely 60 days. So, on what day was the lake half full? What do you guys think is the answer, right? If it is doubling every 24 hours to fill up the lake. Just type in your answers over here. Should be simple, but don't be in a hurry, right? It's not a very trick question or a very difficult question. Okay, Monish says 15 days the lake was half full. What about others, right? You're basically doubling, and in 60 days, uh, okay, Kapish says 59 days. All right. Rakshana says 20 to 25 days. Suganti says 10 to 20. Mickey also says 59 days. So I do think Kapish and Mickey are right. Remember, it doubles, right? So half full would be 59 days, and by 24 hours, it will have doubled. So if it is half, it will become full. And so 59 days is the right answer for this question. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, these are just some more theoretical things which we've just put in the slides for you to kind of take a look at. We're not going to go through it, but hopefully, right, you've realized the importance, becoming a critical thinker. How do you become one? How do you avoid the pitfalls and mistakes? And how can you present some of and use different techniques to become one, right? In our future semesters, We will talk about various different mental models that can be used, right, for you to develop these skills. Remember, these skills are, you're not born with them, you can learn them as they are compounding. So as you practice more, you will get better at it, right? And so trying to figure ways of practicing this will make you better. So that is kind of the end of the session. So I think that's about all that we had for today. I'm here to take questions. I did see somebody had a thing about Google having limited global data centers in terms of our. Remember, I said, like, for every company, it depends on what is the right thing for that company, right? This company, its customers are in only one country, right? So having global data centers didn't really matter. In fact, it was not even a point of criteria for the evaluation. Yeah. Um, do you guys have other questions or thoughts with regards to what we have discussed today? Hopefully, as I said, you've gotten a good sense of how important this decision making ability is. You can never become a great decision maker overnight, or come up with the best decision at one point in time, unless you get into the habit of trying to do these things on a daily basis. Yeah. Okay. um well, as I said, Vikin, our evaluation was almost on about 300 different factors, right? And we've honestly moved to GCP more than 6 years ago and have never had any issue or problem with them. So we do feel that our decision was, after 6 years, was a good decision, has worked out extremely well for us, and we've had no challenges or issues using GCP, versus like an AWS or an Azure. Uh, Anyways, anything else that you guys have? Please raise it in the chat window. I'm here. The session is done, as we said. Uh, you know, we will be sharing the link to the quiz. Please take your quiz, because it's a good way for you to try and make sure you've understood the topic. Monish, it was AWS, the second choice that we had. But this is 6 years ago, so obviously things may have changed, but we are doing very well. Santosh, give me some social platforms to share our problems to the world. I'm not sure I fully understand what you're saying, Santosh. I mean, if you want to try and make this into a habit or a practice, here's one tip that you can use, right? Get together 5, 8, 10 of your friends, right? And say, what we are going to do is test our abilities of becoming a better critical thinker, right? And so as a group, right, you decide on a particular topic, right? I don't know, could take anything, right? Take whatever is happening today, right? The Trump tariffs, will it impact India? Yes, no, right? And maybe each person can go off, do their own analysis. The 5, 8, 10 of you get together in your canteen, have a discussion about this topic, right? And then you kind of hear what other people researched, found out, and you might start becoming better, right? Next week, take up another topic. Take up, is AI, a year from today, what is going to be the biggest change that AI will bring in your life, right? Again, each person can go off, think on their own, do research, you come back, have a discussion with your group, right? So an easy way for you, rather than going looking for social platforms, is get together with friends, create a group, pick up a topic, and have those kind of discussions, right? I mean, these are kind of things that will help you in the longer term and help you prepare for life in the corporate world, versus just going to the canteen. I'm not saying it's wrong. I mean, obviously at this age you want to go spend more time with your friends, but sometimes try and use your time wisely, and spend it on things that are helping all of you. Yeah. Okay, that's all that I had. Again, thanks for your attention. Thanks for participating. Please look for the links to the quiz, as well as the links to the slides that we will be sharing. We are here at any point if you want to reach out to us, and see you again next week then. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.